Good evening, folks, and welcome to another session from the Wise Asylum. Well, I thought you've stretched your brains a bit in the last few live streams. I thought we might have a bit of a chill tonight and go through a lot of images to just have another look at a bit of history. It is in sync with everything we're saying, of course, but it's not. You don't have to get your thinking cap on. You can just relax. So get a bevy, sit down, chill out. And we'll have a little bit of a gander at some nice images. You might know about this topic. And if you do, you still might learn something. If you don't, you're going to learn something. But you're not going to have to don your thinking cap so much with the Jack and Ori. But before we get to that, let's just have a look at the situation we're in right now. Now, consider that the way the priesthood control the masses is through gaining an image of an event. Okay? So we can go World War I. All the images that you know and remember from World War I, but that's quite a way back. It's the images that they keep using that keeps the mindset going. Then you've got Nagasaki, the little girl running off. Another image to cement in your minds the horror of the nuclear bomb. Yeah? Then you've got Vietnam. You've got that when they're all leaving on the helicopter. That image is fixed in people's minds to that event. Then you've got Diana. Oh, actually, you've got JFK. Another image. Yeah? Which they carry through and control everybody's minds because they can use these images again and again and again. You know, as off the image, you get the official story. That's drummed into your brain. You saw it no better than the last great image that they had to play with, which was 9/11. You know, that image, if you remember 9/11, if you watched it, you could see quite obviously it was a setup the minute you saw it. But obviously lots of people, because they're obsessed with television, they're going to go with the narrative, the official story, which if you remember, they thrust it down your neck. Every single news report, every single documentary, the same mantras. Bin Laden did it. Afghanistan, cave, must get, kill, 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 destroy. All that narrative shoved down your neck so that whenever they used that image again, if you were slacking, if you were slacking a bit on the war mode, you weren't behind it as you should be, out of pop 9/11 images all over the show again. So, that's 2001. Yeah, 22 years on. 22 being a very important number. They need a new image to play with. Okay? Now, what might they do? What might say? Well, if you're paying attention, what have they brought into the arena in the last, let's say since December? Nuclear. Now you've got one of Vlad's impalers bigging it up, let's nuke London. So you've got Americans have always been under this impression that the prophecies of Nostradamus was America be attacked at 6 a.m. in the morning on the East Coast, and nobody knew, done it. But everybody. That'd be enough. We'd be off World War III. So, yeah, they may want World War III. They could well want it. But what they want more than anything is the image. They need a new image to keep this brain fear crap going. You know, they've got everybody that did the deed under this last 3 years. They're already over here. They're in their own world now. Everything revolves around that for them. That's it. You know, here in UK, over 23 million didn't take the first, you know, or rather didn't take the second. There's a lot of people that didn't take any more and still haven't took any more. So for you, the script that has just been isn't really, it's not doing the job anymore. It's not doing the job anymore. You need something brand spanking new. That every time you come off track and you start to see something they don't want you to see, boom, they'll put this new image out. So we're looking, aren't we? That they're going to do a nuclear explosion. They have to. They don't have a choice. They have to do something else now to corral all your attention. And we can see it now being spoken of. Vlad and his impaler talking about nuking London. You see, that might sound like a bit, but to be fair, in all the studies I've done around Adelphi House in the years, the one thing you can see clearly through studying that stuff is that the ship has sailed. You know, the power has gone. It's all been shifted out. Canada has took most of the wealth, you know, the patents, the copyrights, all the power is afforded to the inner city. It's all gone. It's moved out. The ship has sailed. It would not surprise me if London was actually the target. Now, I know that might, but just think in terms of what I've said about how much they need this new image to corral the minds of everybody. They need it more than anything else in the world. That's what they need. And it doesn't mean there'll be a continuum into Third World War. The shock, the horror, the laws, the powers they're going to claim, the fact that everybody will be shitting themselves. You know, you can see how that'll feed in. Just keep feeding into this new script under the fear of this nuclear conflagration. Now, it may well happen over the Ukraine. Between them, you know, especially Zelensky, they've slaughtered more Russians and more Ukrainian communities than people are actually inclined to believe. And that's probably because if you do start to look at it that way, and you've encouraged this war, you've encouraged people to go, you've thrown money at it, you've sat back while they throw money at it on your behalf. The fact that these dipsticks in Parliament, you're talking the Starmer, you're talking Boris, all the leaders, the cabinet people, that level, there were no change in this idea of UK pushing war with Russia. It's not in our interest to do that. It's not in America's interest to do it. It's in the interest of the priesthood, which is controlling everything and everybody, because they control the media, they control the money. You know, before, because they were bankers, these merchants, they couldn't own land, but they could make sure they controlled the use of it by being the salesman for all the produce, the fruits of the earth. Through the banking system, they don't own the land, but they control what goes on the land. Through the trusts, through the foundations. National Trust, you know, take it, you can't do anything. You can't even come on it anymore. Don't do a pee and let your dog poo on it. Yeah, they don't own it. They took it off you in trust. They totally control it. The bank's now ready. You can see. And I've been saying this for quite a number of years, that the banks have been setting themselves up in the background, the central banks mainly, to scoop up all your properties. Now, Klaus Schwab says you'll have nothing or own nothing and be happy. Well, how are they going to achieve that? First, you've got the interest rate. So these guys who are all buy-to-let, these guys are going to fall flat on their face pretty quickly as these interest rates start to buy. Your first-time buyers are going to be in the same boat. All you guys who took money out of your property and remortgaged. Again, they've pulled you back into the system of debt. You're in it, you're on it, and these interest rates are going to hurt. Now, that's one side of it. The next phase of it, of course, when everybody's in even more, is this wind and rain change game. Because once they get that in, the amount of nonsense they're going to force you to carry out as works on your properties to satisfy said nonsense, it's just all but the Vanguard, BlackRock, central banks that they operate for would be able to afford to do, and the housing trusts, they will be able to afford to do it as well. Yeah? This is what's going to happen. These housing trusts, I've told you about these before, these housing associations, they stole your properties under a contract, a deed, to say they'd do them up, improve them. They didn't. You know, they did the opposite. You could eat your water by two means before, you can't anymore. You could eat your property just by one gas fire, now you have to put central heating on. Gas hungry monsters that have been, hacked to the insanities. And the housing associations have been buying up properties since the day they started. And it's your properties, remember. On your wealth, they have capitalised and created these monsters. These are the only operations that are going to be able to afford to carry out all the work they're going to demand for wind and rain change. So this is how they're going to start. You need to look at it in this way. Because even if you own your home outright, if you're tied into this on person, you will own nothing and be happy. You won't be happy, but they'll take it that you're happy, and so won't interest in your woes and your cries. They're not going to be interested. As far as they're concerned, you're happy. And as we went through last week on the law stuff, we're all tenants on the land. No matter what position you've got. Even the barons were tenants to the king. Everything is about serving the kingdom of the king. And it comes right down then. You're a tenant on the land, all the way down, whichever way you go, because you're a tenant for somebody else. So English law, that's English law. Roman law, you see, Roman law, it's the hidden. Everything's hidden. The secret deal, the hidden ledger side of things. Because the families that have controlled Rome since it collapsed, or you could say since Seneca managed to excite the Britons to annihilate the strongest remaining force of legions that Rome had at the day, and that the Carthaginians, as we're told, took over Rome. Of course, the Carthaginians are the later Phoenicians. They call themselves Jews, but they didn't. They were Hebrews back in the day. Again, we have gone through this idea, or this reality, that the tribe of Judah was never a part of the Israelite tribes. So Dan were a big seafaring part of what was the Hebrews, or we know them as the Phoenicians. I've said before, I'm quite sure that this naval force that we know as the Phoenicians, previous to it being taken over by this, I call it Babylon system, we're going to go back one in who they are in a bit as well. Which might be interesting to some, it might not be. But you can see that they've took everything back and pushed it into Rome, and Rome for a very long time has not been the original. Well, actually, Rome has never been the original idea of what we would call the church. That were based here on the British Isles, specifically Ireland, as the centre and power point of that. It was called the Church of Aisa. But of course, the Druids were taken over by a force from within, basically. And it's suggested in some histories that they became the Hyperboreans, which was why they shifted themselves up to the top. And then from there, through the Silk Road, began to basically take over what the original Church of Aisa from Ireland, which was the remnants from the flood Atlantis, yeah, both to Ireland, the British Isles, and also into the Americas, south and north, also into Egypt. And that from that point, from getting to the British Isles, they started, contrary to what we're told, and remember that everything that they do, the priesthood, is on the inverse. So everything they then present us is on the inverse. Which is why if you're doing Kabbalah, the works of Kabbalah, you are going to get the inverse of what it is you're aiming to do. Not just left, right, but top down. That's the way they play. So they have us all seeing this migration consistently coming from the east to the west. Well, the dark side has done that, absolutely. But the original migrations, mass migrations after Atlantis, was from the west to the east. The Aryans. So they went to Persia. They were the Scythians. And the big majority of their imperial landmass was what we call Siberia. Which is why you get Tartaria tied to it. So the original church, as we would call it, we call it Christianity today. So we're talking not about the church itself, we're talking about the theology, the idea, the morality. All about seeking the kingdom within, not from the garden. If you're going to go in the garden, you're building the world. So that was the original ethos, and that spread successively from the west to the east. But then, successively, we chased back. Especially when the Druids in Ireland got took over by the Druidists. And then you had the sacrifice coming in, the human sacrifice, etc. Oh, then off they went to Hyperborea. Took over Rome. Rome then took over what was left here. So you can see this game, this interplay. And when we look at history, you're always being shown the dark side as being the light side, which is why you see these migrations from east to west. And it's nonsense. It really is. The history books don't speak that language. If you look at, probably, I'm talking about books you may not have seen yourself back in the day. But that's what the kind of pictures that you see. Now, I believe Michael Tazarian has written a book about this. Now, I haven't read it, unfortunately, but he is an interesting guy, is Tazarian. And I'd be surprised if his book isn't full of source documents, source prose, and source data, because that's the way he works, and maybe worth a look. But the Irish origins of all civilization, which was the step-off point from Atlantis breaking up. But it was also in the Americas. So this idea that the Americas, as we've been given this picture of the Wild West and how America was set up when the Europeans went over, is, to be honest, quite nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. There were cities all across America. There were cities all across South America, of course, obfuscated with jungles that we know are there today. So there's all this, as I've said many times, what we are facing today is the mimic of the creation. So obviously it's a bad copy, so it has to do nonsense shit to keep itself going, especially when it comes to keeping it out of your earshot, so you don't see the game. That's where so much of the nonsense they have to carry out comes into play. It's preventing you guys from actually seeing beyond the veil, or beyond the curtain, if you want to refer to the Wizard of Oz. So, yeah, very interesting kind of stuff when you look at this. But then it also brings into the equation that there are many catastrophes, geological, all the time. They're always happening. We know we've got earthquakes, we know we've got volcanoes, but there's also things called what they call mud floods. And you can see that today. You know, it'll get saturated, boom, down it comes. Swallows up towns, but probably not to the rooftops. That's everywhere in America. It's all over America that these kind of situations took place. Also, there's this idea of liquefaction. You know, if a certain trumpet or sound is heard, or vibration coming from one of the planetary bodies that vibrated the Earth at a certain part, in a certain vibration, then it liquefies, doesn't it? And everything would sink, or appear to sink, kind of thing. There's all sorts of science that you can look at that shows those things to be possible. In the same way, certain frequencies can actually move solid objects. This is sciences that they keep off and out of the mix, because of course if we all had that kind of idea or access to, we wouldn't be able to pay for their energy. We wouldn't have to pay for their oil. This fake system, the world, wouldn't keep going. It'd be gone. So that's what we'll have a look at today. But it's, like I said, it's a Jack and Ori more than anything. Paul says, good evening, Sean and everyone. Good evening to you, Paul. Husky says, hi, mate. Hi, Husky. Mew says, hello to all the 10 in the Wise Asylum. Anthony Musgrove said hello. And Sean and the gang. Hi, Anthony. And Mew. Slipknot says, alright, Sean, everyone. I hate Slipknot. Debbie says, hi, PY Music says, evening all. Untitled, hello. Chris R, yo. I see a noose on New York. A nuke. Or nuke. Well, that's a prophecy. But I think it'd be a bit easier for them to get to Blighty, wouldn't it? They're not that far away. And not only that, it'd show in its entirety, because our so-called submarines would be nowhere to be found. They're probably tossing around over in China. Then we'd realise that we don't have actually missile systems on Blighty to protect us from anything, because all our funding for military has been to satisfy NATO and all these nonsense wars since the last event that gave them the image that carried it through, especially for the baby boomers, because they still believe their generation was smart enough to go to the moon. Remember that. You know, they were clever cookies. But of course, they weren't. Cos says, howdy, hiya Cos, and we've got the gigs on again and a smiley face. Last Pillar says, hello, the regulars, hello to the newbies, hello to the wise man Sean. Well, thank you very kindly. June says, good evening all, good evening June. Liam Tree 6, hello. Mew says, Anthony Watt is watching, just can't comment, trouble with gremlins in his phone. Slipknot Cesarian equals 33. Yeah, but you've got to remember, Trev, you know, everything in this place appears to have duality. Male, female, left, right, light, dark. So the number 33 in and of itself isn't all evil, all dark. There's two sides to it. When we're looking at secret societies, what we tend to be looking at is how they're using these numbers or these frequencies to enhance their game, the world. You know what I mean? I mean, I love double numbers. 22 being my favourite number by far. I don't know what it is. It's just something about it, and it's a natural sort of thing. So, you know, Cesarian 33. If you've actually ever looked at his stuff, because I mean, I think I did talk to him once on email, but way back, him, Jordan Maxwell, all these guys came together, and he put out some great stuff all the time. He did a lot of good stuff, and then he opened up a mystery school for people to join, where he was teaching them what he knew. You'd have to look at it yourself and see. Don't just go, number 33, I'm not looking. Otherwise, you're doing what religious people do. I'm not looking. You know what I mean? You can't do that. You've got to... 33 is a powerful number. 22 is a powerful number. 11 is a powerful number. 44, 55, 66, 77, etc. Because they're a double entendre. It's done a cycle and it's back again. They're powerful numbers to invoke because it's a frequency. You know, like the 369. All these numbers in sequence, there's a science to them. I don't claim to be an expert at all, but I've covered a lot of them. So I have a good idea of what they're saying. But obviously, it's insidious when you get into numbers. And numerology, back in the day when I went into that, it's just, there's no end to what you can see. Just applying numerology to anything. Bible, a storybook even. If you saw it... But you'd have to... You get to a point where you think, okay, some of these secret societies are using these numbers and such for codes, for initiates. I accept that. But then you just take any book and apply these kind of things to it. And these numerological sequences are coming up all over the shop. It can't be a conscious thing all the time. But then, if you're dealing in certain knowledge, you might be it might be on a particular frequency that'll show itself in what you're writing. It doesn't mean to say you've consciously formed that idea and you're making sure that everything in your book is in accordance with this numerology. That's when you start to become a serious occultist. And like I said before to people, because people have said, why don't you talk about the occult? That's an old part of my life. That were the mystery school days. It's a long time gone. And I couldn't wait to not think that way. Because as you start to enter that with numerology and stuff like that, you think you're freeing your mind, or everybody that's on that sojourn thinks they're freeing their mind, but what you're actually doing when you... And these are insights you get when you've moved off that, you're aware and not in that. But you're getting so trapped into these small parcels of how you think. It's another trap. So numbers are numbers, because the whole thing's number. Everything is number. So you're going to find interesting things when you look at them. But 33 in and of itself is just a potent number. It's a potent frequency. And if you can work with it consciously, which is when you're getting into what you call magic, things can happen. Things do happen. But in most cases, people that do magic today are using old formulas. So they're using somebody else's formula. Tried and tested. You're calling out all the egregore that belongs to that practice, that path. So wherever you go in that, there's a system. If you're operating that system, it'll have its entities, it'll have its doctrines, it'll have its traditions, it'll have its requirements in all things. But they're just systems, they're paths. And they've been tread a long time, which is why they say nothing new under the sun. Because everything that's out there today is there because somebody's kept it in the mix and it's been tread before. It's what we forget, or what's been forgotten, that's important. And like we can see now in this reset, that's exactly what they want everybody to do, is to forget what was. They put in a new picture to it. They force it down the necks of the youngsters so they don't know any different. Generation X, we're in a funny situation because we grew up in the idea of what was. We've seen it change so quickly. We've all realised that our parents were complete and utter idiots, which is why we all just said, sod it, we'll get on with it. And now here we are. You know what I mean? We're in that mid-position. Fruit bats up there, united, baby boom generation, double fruit bat united in younger generations. It's like, whoa, Are you just going to roll along on the nonsense and watch telly and not give a shit? Or are you going to start to realise that your life growing up and how we lived, how we existed, what we did and learned, probably wasn't for no reason. I think we need to pull back on a lot of the kind of stuff, mindsets that we used to have. And in most cases, it means stop listening to a wife because she's thick. She's sucked into all this shit. So, that's where you're at, whether you're like it or not. Married, kids, I don't care who you are, if you're male, that's the position you're in, especially if you're Generation X. It's where you're going from here. What are you going to do now? Now then. So, yeah, new Peter's question. Tracy is in Dick Tracy. Oh, Tracy. So, Liam Tracy. Okay, got you, mate, no worries. Do nukes exist? They do exist, but they're not anywhere near as potent as what we got told in the 80s. However, they do have neutron bombs. They have hydrogen bombs. Of course, if they explode it above a target area, you don't get as much radioactive fallout as you do if it's ground. But I saw data from the Japanese libraries way back in the day that said there were no nuclear bomb. It were all set up on the ground. So they set fire bombs up everywhere. Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Now, okay, I'm not saying that's a fact, but the records that were held in the Japanese libraries, that's exactly what they said. So, obviously, the generations in Japan now are probably not even going to know that. But that was available back in the day. They were there. They exist. Where they are now, I don't know. But there we go. It's all a theatre, innit? 9/11. How long did it take them to set that up? Because they built them from the get-go. So if you're building them from the get-go, to eventually pack it out with explosives, especially around the lift shafts. Then put a team in 6 months before, tied into either Neil Bush or Jeb Bush, a company that spent 6 months with armed guards on every level that they were working on in the lift shafts. Yeah, you've had all the pockets there when you built it. Easy peasy, innit? You know. And they're thinking these lengths of times. We're all thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow. They're not. They're working to the great work of the ages. So they need another image. They need it. They're desperate for it. It's the only thing they need right now. Because they're 22 years away from the last one. You know, okay, there's a lot going on in that time, but there's no profound images, is there? Such as Nagasaki, you know, Vietnam, these 9/11, you know, Diana, the JFK. Them images, old school, old news. That's what cajoled the baby boomer generation. They have to do it new. Now they've got aliens. So you've dad as well. You have aliens going on everywhere. That's Project Bluebeam, is what it is. The balloons that they're showing you. These are what your satellites are. There isn't any satellites up there that they can get to stay up. It's balloons that do all that kind of stuff. It's a con. It's everything that you think is a con because it comes from NASA. That's where it all comes out of, NASA. And that were the Third Reich science base transferred over to the US. That's all it's done since it were set up, is con you. And television, it's just, I mean, before that the radio, which they did with the War of the Worlds experiment, didn't they, in the US, where they put it across all the news radio stations that they were being attacked and invaded by aliens. America absolutely shit itself. People were having heart attacks, ringing, oh my God, they were going insane. And that were a mind experiment. Probably one of the first real moves to do it. Roswell kicked it all off in 1947. It's all theatre, all of it. And if you sucked into that as real, but it's same in art, it's same in your entertainment, all that same pumping, the same shit, just in a different way. You know what I mean? It's all the same pish, pushing you into that world and reinforced because Elvis said it, or, you know, Johnny Rotten said it, or whoever it is that you took on board as a youngster. Their narrative fits no matter what level of society you're at. There's an art there for you. There's entertainment there for you. There's books there for you to cement your idea. So that is not his real name. 33 is my number, Sean. I see it. Yeah. Don't be. I mean, if you think about it, the Fruitbat Brigade that copy and paste and send across the internet world, they just see people like David like going 33 and they'll go, oh my God, shit yourself, quick. Well, think about it. If you are putting yourself at the top of the tree in a particular society and then blasting it as 33, you're swanking. Oh yeah, it's a swank. So obviously, even they understand that number is exceptionally powerful. So yeah, don't be scared of using, you know, whatever it is that you in your reality, your bubble, whatever numbers are meaning something to you at any given time. Look at the number. You know, sometimes you might think, I keep seeing fives. Go and have a look at what that number means, because there's a plethora of data to go. This is what it means. This is what it means to these guys. This is what it means to them guys. This is blah blah blah. Before you know it, you can just think, all right, what's he telling me? It's all sorts of synchronicities like that if you're looking. And the egregore psych. Yeah, everything that's been built around something that's made an impression in the ether. Elemental, you might call it. The world of the elementals. And in most cases, these magicians are securing allyship with a lot of these unseen entities. And a lot of elementals are created, of course, by extreme emotional focus. So if you're miserable for 10 years, so much so that you're crying every day, you want to kill yourself, you've created an elemental in the ether with your own energy, a phantom. Yeah, And then most people, that phantom then takes them back again. You're in a cycle. Woo, but it's your own making. It's not necessarily some demon sent. It's, in a lot of cases, a ghost you've created from your own excessive focus on misery. And now, same with the hatred, anger. If you hate as a core thing, most of your mind, your thought forms are going to be around that nonsense. So you can imagine the kind of elementals that you're creating around yourself. You know, like it's like you move into a house in some cases. You may have moved into a house there that's either got damp soil around it or there's water underneath it, etc. It's amplified. That's when a lot of people think the place is haunted, when in effect what's happened is that shadow that you formulated, even as a child, has just been amplified, and now you're seeing it. You're going, whoa, wait a minute. And you think it's something else completely, but it's yours. You made it. There's so much to be known when, if you don't understand anything occult, then you're always going to be at the mercy of people like perhaps David Icke and such, who just put out these numbers and inscribe it with evil. That's rubbish, isn't it? It's rubbish. So, and if you think of it that way, you're actually taking that number and frequency away from everything except evil. Well, it doesn't stop it existing, does it? It still exists. You just denied it, and it's evil. So yeah, an egregore is. So Christianity. How many people have died, warred, blah blah blah? All that exists in the other dimensions as a remnants of those emotions, and you would call that the egregore of that tradition. Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, all these different traditions come within it, and when you join it, you're joining a physical tradition, people that are into it, but then it goes back all through ancestry. That's why Native Americans and a lot of the old original cultures very aware of the ancestors, because it matters, and it does matter. And if you're getting into your past lives, a lot of times for some people, if you get yourself to a point where you're pretty solid, you can understand a lot of that ancestors that are around you, because you might be born a white guy in England, but really your blood or blood race or tie is you've studied as a different tradition, say, for instance. But you have an affinity with it. Obviously, in this life, you're not, but that's where you're coming from. Kindred, as they call it. Kindred blood. So yeah, egregore, ancestors, all the same kind of thing. And you're calling in that. And so if you join a tradition, not only are you joining it for its benefits, but you're also taking on its karma. So the saints, you might say, in Christianity, are people who have understood that and move to try and negate some of the karma that tradition's picked up. Which is why, the church itself will look for martyrs. All religions will look for martyrs. But of course, it depends which tradition. To be a martyr in Islam, you have to go and kill. Well, you're not actually removing any karma, you're adding to it, aren't you? So in the Christian theology, where it's you give your life for others, that's the kind of martyr. So it's a different kind of ideas of martyrdom. So you can see that in the idea for a Christian church, being that it's so full of karma because it's slaughtered a lot of people and brain fucked a lot of people, it's got a lot of karma. So if you're joining it, and I am, fine. But do you know what you've just joined up and what kind of karma you're dealing with? And do you want to give your own life up to help negate some of that karma? So that's what you're doing in wars. It's what you're doing all this. It's just... So you've got to keep yourself and know that the kingdom you're seeking, the kingdom that you're interested in, is the kingdom within, which is Genesis 1. not Genesis 2. Right, so we better crack on, aren't we? Because I've been gobbing off for 40 minutes. Who did say we'd have a chill? Do you think in April will happen a big event? I don't know. Could even be. You see, if they did April, it'd be to counteract the Phoenix, astrological Phoenix system that Claudio has brought to the table, wouldn't it? And then it would also work in sync with the ideas that Jason Brashears has brought in to the mix. But the more I've been looking at this 1850-1900 reset, comparing it to today, I don't think they were waiting for a catastrophe at 1900 at all. They were playing a reset, exactly what they're doing now. The catastrophe was the fact that they achieved the reset in that 50-year period. And then we got World War I. So as they're achieving that, in the back end, you got Albert Pike writing out, now we need a 3 World War strategy for the next reset. Yeah, they'd achieved it by 1900. So once they'd done the Civil War in the US, because we'll have a little look at what that were really about. Again, a bit like all these wars, we're painted, given a picture, but in reality, that's not what's gone on at all. It's just so bizarre when you get into it. But the fact that we've got all this technology actually works against us because they're just bombarding you with the same narrative from every angle. So I don't know. I mean, I've even thought this month, to be honest, but we'll see. Probably April would counteract any ideas of an astrological phoenix in the hearts of man, wouldn't it? It'd certainly affect people's the purity of their mind, their thoughts, their heart on the back of something like that, wouldn't it? Because it's going to bring together a lot of anger. So it could be another attempt to screw that for a lot of people. So yeah. Right, strikes every time, including taking the piss. Well, karma's a funny old game, innit? But again, so when you start to look at some of the older stories and traditions that are not in the biblical script, that, you know, the original battle, the Elohim, yeah, look at what we've created, man, male, female, we love it. One geezer says, nah, he's shit, crap, they're crap. I'm better than them. Yeah. So to the Elohim say, oh yeah, how do you know? How do you know? Well, I just think they are and they're shit and blah, 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 blah. So, there's a division going on between these Elohim. There's 3, as usual. There's the ones that said, yeah, we're happy with this is banging. Look at what we've done and we're amazing. We're more fantastic than even Life in the Mix. And I don't blame them because they did create quite a gig. So, I'm going with that. And then you've got this other upstart saying, nah, these dwarfs are not good. They're made of meat. What's this shit? Anyway, so he's not having it. And so the third are going, well, who cares? You know, just get on with it. Let's crack on. So you've got one lad, one boy's going, yeah, Genesis 1. We were happy with our creation. We've got this other shindig that says, nah, yours is shit. This is better. So some they call him Lucifer, they call him Satan, whatever you want to call him. But he's this fallen guy that said, nah, I'm going to show you that these monkeys are crap. So he's doing his gig down here, and he's cracking on, he's created the world, Genesis 2, blah, 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 blah. And there's a Lord sat there watching, just going, oh, yeah, it's not looking very good, is it, for either side here, really? And then you look at it and you think, well, in that battle, look at all this karma that they've gained in all this time. It's no wonder it's going to go to shit. Do I want to be in the middle of it? I mean, we're going to be in the middle of it anyway, but do I want to add to any of that karma on either side? So, you know, anyway, so here we go. Karma. What is karma? I think it's just if you say, I'm all this, you're going to be judged by all that. And if you step out of line in that, it's karma. Bang. But if you're out of it going, whoa, shit, oh, you're all crazy. You know, you're all fucking mental. I don't want any of that nonsense. You don't actually dragging any of that karma on yourself, are you? Do you know why? Because every kingdom's out here. a bit different when you're looking from within, because you're pulling out your own shit there, aren't you? I mean, you might pull out dirty porn and all sorts of stuff, but at least acknowledge it's in you and then get rid of it. Or jump on and have some crack. But, you know, when we all go, oh, I couldn't do that in a million years. I'm telling you now, if you were fucking starving and the guy next door to you had some fucking food, you'd go, yeah. So what you mean is, oh, I couldn't do that at this stage. I'm living quite okay, thank you very much. But if you get shit, I mean, this is the game they play, innit? They like that. This is like why they set up starvation as the main function for getting the monkeys to annihilate themselves. Yet war is another, you know. And it's a theatre game for them. This is their theatre every Friday night, you know, when they're recouping on the data as to what's going on, when they get the debrief. They're loving it to see how the monkeys, they'll love to just hate each other and kill each other and bay for more death and more war and more death, you know. Yeah, the monkeys are at it all day. They love it. They love it. So that's what they're watching. That's their entertainment. And then some of them will jump in and have a bit for themselves, you know. We know that there's all this fruit bat sexual nonsense that they're pushing everywhere as well. Right, let me have a look. Oh, we've had some fruit bats this week, I've noticed. One particular commenting on YouTube. So when I looked at its little channel, there's nothing on it. It's only just been started, so don't get excited by it. Let the fruit bats speak. You don't have to take them on. You don't have to answer them. And you don't have to stick up for me. I'm telling you now, I really don't give a shit. You know, see as you please. There's always that click of a mouse to shift onto another channel. If you don't like it, it's fine. Off you go. Right, so we'll have a look here, Foss. I hope you can see everything alright. So we'll just have a quick brief, just to give you an idea. So this is last Druid, Ben McBrady of the old Gaelic order. So Gaelic obviously is how the Irish spoke, the old Celtic, might say Scythian language. And of course, when the Hanoverians came over here, took and attacked Ireland, anybody that spoke Gaelic got absolutely leathered. So they didn't like people talking Gaelic, because of course it goes against the Roman idea of the tradition. So this is actually a video. It's an interesting video, made I think by BBC or something like that. But it's just this guy, the last he says, of the Gaelic order, the Druidic order, and he died in 1996. So he was a descendant of Lugar MacLugar, Lugid MacLugar, who was the chief Druid of Ireland and Druid to the High King Leary and the kings of Leinster. Lugar MacLugar was also believed to have been a member of the Old Gaelic Order. The Old Gaelic Order came originally from Phoenicia, and they were sun worshippers. They were known as the priests of Pelagius and emanated from the tribe of Dan, hence the order being called snakes, the emblem for the tribe of Dan. They were bards, psychics, healers, walkers between the worlds, lawgivers and makers, priests and kings. One of the first abilities taught to new initiates was telepathy. The order at all times was to remain outside society, within it yet outside at the same time. All knowledge came from the realm of the order, but they were practically concerned with astronomy because they had experienced so many significant calamities. It was thought that full knowledge of astronomy would enable them to predict conditions, and these calamities were likely to take place, and take some action to protect themselves. Another primary function of the order was to preserve language. Now, this bunch here that we're talking about are what we're told with the Druids, but this is again when what we would call Babylon took it over, but before Babylon, Hyperborea. Yeah, so they were the same, they were Hebrews, but they were dark side, big battles here, off they went, they were kicked out, and they went up to Hyperborea, which is right up top end of Scandinavia. So this is going back way back, and then through the Silk Road, they managed to basically infiltrate and disturb everybody's traditions based on, and then came back on this system that's previous to this. I know it gets confusing. The Order of Druids in Ulster. When the Druids came, many members of the order infiltrated that order. Elsewhere in Europe, the Druids carried out their ceremonies in oak groves. The term for oak is drua, so they became known as Druidi or Druids. Now in Ireland specifically, the Druids worshipped the god of the sunset, the Daru, the red god, A priest of that order was called the Sile Dar-Ro, a servant of the Red God. Over time, this was shortened to Daru, then Dru, or Druid. That's how confusion arises between the Druids on the continent and the Druids in Ireland. They both have the same name for different reasons. Well, no, they have the same name because they were two branches of what was originally the same. And then the darker priestcraft took the knowledge and buggered off. And they're the ones behind all the shit. Yeah, so we can see them into Babylon. You can see them into the Second Temple. And you can see them at the back end of all this that's going on around the world today. Not the original Druids. Not the original Druids that all the Romans and all the elites of Greece and everywhere else sent their children, their offspring, the aristocrats, to have their offspring educated. We're not talking about that lot. We're talking about the original Church of Aisa. The order continued to survive by adapting itself first to the Druids and then to Christianity. It keeps its traditions and beliefs but operated inside the Christian matrix. The members of the order were priests and kings, and in Christianity it developed into bishops and herenachs about the 12th century. In Ireland, eventually, the herenachs, not being bishops anymore because of the suppression of Catholicism, integrated into Protestant religion. There was no change in the central purpose of the order, whatever guise they operated under. And of course, they claimed to be Jews. But we have to remember that the original Hebrew side of things has been twisted out, and that who them that call themselves Jews now and have attached themselves to Israel are not really what they say they are. And if you want to look for a tradition, they're pushing the Babylonian system through the Talmud. Ben's earliest recorded answer was Lugar Magluger. Magluger seems to have been the most important figure in the 2nd century. He was a lawgiver. He was described as one who adapted the Sensuous More, the great compendium of law, to the Christian tradition. So you can see the 2nd century. So this is, after sack of Jerusalem and all that in 70 AD. He was described as the one who adapted. So everything was being changed at this time. And this guy was obviously one of the guys that were working for the other side, but pulling this power system into it because Rome were moving into this, what we know and what we've known for a long time. But I don't think this goes back as far. These events are not perhaps as far back as we're taught. So it basically just goes through a few more interesting things about it. It says, what is particularly interesting about the basic facts of the sack of Rome by the Celts in the 4th century BC, surviving in both the traditions of the Gaulish Celts of the 1st century AD and the traditions of the British Celts of the 12th century, is the very fact of their survival. The Celts who sacked Rome were Cisalpine Gauls, yet the historic traditions had not only made their way into Transalpine Gaul, but in Celtic Britain, and become inseparably linked with the histories of those disparate Celtic peoples. Here surely is another example of how closely the Celtic world was united by common bonds with the Druids as a class represented. But this is the original Druids. This is the Druids at the time when Molumatus was king in Cornwall and gave us the right to the highway. The Trojans. This is who they were. Yeah, the Greeks, the Scythians. All tribes of Israel. If you actually look at it properly, these are the kind of tribes that were known as the Israelites. But then Brennus sacked Rome in around 400 BC. Actually, from 390 to 387 BC, it says here, Brennos and Belinus were sons of Molmutine, or Donald the Bold, as he was known. And Belinus is a lot of, you're going back to the Phoenicians again, but I don't think the original Phoenicians are this shitty cult, this dark bunch, because the Phoenicians, in my opinion, were the naval forces of this older system that came after Atlantis, and obviously were broken up as Egypt were broken up. Even the Spartans claimed to be of Egypt, not the Greeks per se. So it gets interesting, does that history. It's a really interesting video. And then there's a couple of links to Alan Wilson. He's another interesting guy. But that's not really what we want to be looking at right now. I'm going to... So I'm going to take us over to display screen, because I've got some images. And they tell a story all on their own and conjure up all sorts of ideas for yourself, really. So what we're looking at here. Calm strikes every time. We've looked at that. Yeah. Right. Okay. So if I display screen, it should. Now you should be able to see a jumble jumble of images. I think we'd better check first before I crack on, because it's not worse than me rabbiting on and you can't see a thing. So could you see images then? I know we've got a delay on as well. Could you see me my desktop? Did you Google that on time? Be quiet, what is he telling me? If only that you lot. Yeah. All's good, chaps. All's good. So could you see those images on my desktop as bands, like long lines? So I don't want to pop on and you can't see now. I think they've extended the delay, you know, on here. I think they have. I think they did. Oh, you couldn't see it, could you? Because I didn't go like that. So now if I do it, you should be able to see a load of images. My apologies. I do forget, that's what I do wrong actually, so I forget to transition. So you should be able to have seen those images. Well, I'll crack on. I'm sure somebody... No. Not even if I do that. So that's twice now I've done it. Because it is important you can see these, to be fair. And then I'm back to that. Yes, okay. Right, got you. Sweet as. Okay, so if I get rid of that, now we're on these images. So, let's have a look at some of these old maps. Now this one here on the right, top left, this is in the 1540s, a map of America. And can you see they've got castles? Yeah, you've got the fleur-de-lis. You've got castles. Now the fleur-de-lis are Frankish emblem, which I would say Franks and a lot of the Scythian cultures, Slavic races, all that over there, were a part of the original church. And that this is where you get your Disneyland kind of castles from. And of course, what nations were a plethora of this? Germany, which is why they had to demolish it. So this is the 1500s, 1540s, and there's a map here depicting castles in America. Yeah, standards, you know. A major empire before Rome fully took over what the West was before this Babylonian system, through the Holy See families, took over the Roman system. And then you've got the one underneath where you've got Tartary, and it shows you so much of what was above all the Siberian area, right across from top of China right up to Finland. A lot of that were classed as Tartaria in the really old maps. Yeah, so that works in sync with the idea that the remnants of Atlantis Priest kings moved out before it fell. We know that, one to Egypt. But then after that, they all settled in British Isles, Greece, places like that. And then they were moving ever eastwards, right across Siberia. And then something happened, because when you look at Siberia, you can see what looks like a massive nuclear conflagration right across the entire Siberian landmass. But more importantly, there's a lot of star forts. Now, if you look at the map to the right, you can see Antarctica isn't ice. And if you look at Canada, Greenland and all those, they seem to be connected. And again, this is 16th century maps. You can't just ignore them and say that they're nonsense, because they don't fit with the maps that we've been had shoved down his neck. Oh no, I've done that one, haven't I? Wait a minute. So if I've done that one, I can go. So like here now, Tartaria, all at the top of here, to Europa. And then the Tartarian Sea. Then they called it the West Ocean. You know? And then you've got part of America over here. So they even used the term America before it were anything like the United States. It's America. And that America wasn't just the North. Big part of South America also called America. So it would have been one empire, but it seems that the biggest part of it was in South America. That's where all the structures were, and we can't see them anymore. And even the Native American stories speak of when they were leaving South America, moving up, and they had to do battle with what they call giants. So they invaded it originally. So these maps they're interesting. They're interesting because they're real. So 3. Now then, we get into a bit of data. Now, I hope you can see all these okay. So this is just a breakup of certain data in keeping with what we're saying in relation to things not being as they seem. Even when you're looking or reading about the Druids, you're looking at this Druid disc, they call it. So the disc translates basically as underworld. So they became the Druids of the underworld. And it says up here, the struggle between Rome and Tyre, which is Ireland. A council of churchmen was called by the Roman Emperor Constantine and assembled at Nice in the year 325 of our era, known in history as the Council of Nice, or Nicaea. Those men knew what the Great Pyramid represented and what it was associated with, and our belief is that it was the purpose to destroy it, as they did so many of the great temples and monuments of the earlier church. So again, they're saying this earlier church knew what these pyramids were. I'm not just saying and suggesting that they were using them. I think the pyramid systems were pre-Atlantis times. That's just my opinion. They did not want to leave standing so much visible evidence of the existence of the former religious institution, which they were going to displace with a new one of their own making. So in ever age since, the leaders of the Roman Church have had a conscious knowledge of the part played by the organisation in the suppression of knowledge concerning the history of the Great Pyramid, the purpose for which it was built, and who the builders were. Now, I differ there, because I don't believe the original Roman Church, set up by Constantine, was the church that we have known under this Babylonian system. Because Constantine were here in British Isles. His father was a Briton. In my opinion, the remnants of what was left here moved into Rome. And so it was as near as damn it as they could get to the old church idea. And then at some point, when Rome fell, it got took over by this dark priestcraft who were all over the Silk Road areas, having at some point already perhaps demolished all what was across Siberia. It's interesting, I looked today for some of the old images I'd seen of where it shows clearly that from satellite or balloon. So many what look like craters from a massive nuclear conflagration, all in the areas around where there were these star forts everywhere. It were interesting. I wish I'd copied them pictures, but I didn't. It says those astute political priests knew that silence on such matters was the most efficacious way to have them forgotten, and by absorbing the old church and papacy in a few generations there would be none left among the people who would know anything about such matters. Therefore, the clerical writers have left us an account that is full of falsehood and invention, such as the invasion of the Vandals in Europe, in order to account for the destruction of churches and monasteries, as well as the property of the outraged inhabitants who resisted despoliation and violence at the hands of the church forces. We believe that the destruction was carried out by the organised vandal of the new church, woken up in state of fanatical zeal by the clergy, which has been going on afoot since maybe once the Vikings ensured that the Byzantium side of things had took root here. So, as I always say, for me, what was the original church has not been the same, or at least it's been being undermined since the time and before the Crusades. So for secret reasons, the name Phoenicians was applied to the Irish race. It is written purposefully in this form of spelling, which has served well in throwing people off track and helped very well in keeping up the deception. If they had written the word in its plain form of Phoenician, there would be too many who were liable to see the true meaning of it, and thereby get a clue to the real truth that was meant to be concealed. The word Phaon or Finn is an Irish name of the sun, and the Phoenicians were the Irish sun worshippers or the magician priests of Aisa, the Irish sun god, who brought their civilization and arts already developed in Ireland with them to Egypt. They erected their monumental altars to the god of the sun. The greatest and most prolonged struggle in ancient times that we have any account of or reliable tradition of was the war between Rome and Ireland, whose name at that time was Ire. We are told by the priest that it was Scotia, from Scoth, choice, select, or if you go with, what's he called? I nearly said his name. Ralph Ellis. He was going on about how Queen Scotia was one of the surviving ancestors of Akhenaten. But I'm not buying that, in truth. Where are we? Which is only a mythical name alluding to a magician adepts, or Magian adepts, or Hebrew priests of the sun. It was only after she was sacked and destroyed and her sacred altars laid in ruins by the English invaders at the instigation of Rome that the English priests gave her the name of Ireland, from IR, the end, or finish. So when they finished their foul work of destruction, the English priests of Rome called her Ireland. The Irish Roman Catholic writers tell their people that IR was one of her old poetic names. That is rubbish and false. The above is the truth, and it stands. No more either did Tara, the most sacred place on the earth for thousands of years, for the whole Aryan race, have its name changed to Newgrange, just for a whim. It was changed, like so many other Irish names of places, in order that, in the course of time, all memory of its great and important distinction of being the capital of the Lord of the Isles of the Western Sea, Earth's Supreme Pontiff, so it's all this is all data about this massive battle between Rome and Ireland. Bottom left, all this was done in order that she could have power and foist upon the world a saviour and a scripture that, taken bodily from the ancient Irish religion and worship, the so-called Hebrew Bible did not come from any people distinctly known in history as the Hebrews, for there never was such people. The name Hebrew is derived from Heber, from ear of fire, an Irish name of the sun. Milesius is the personified sun, the father of the Irish race in Irish history, and Heber is the brother, therefore. He is also a personified attribute of the sun. So Hebrew is a priest of the fire and a disciple of the sun. It is a secret name for the ancient Irish priest of Aisa. It's one of the names by which the church conspirators have camouflaged the ancient Irish priesthood, and by placing the theatre of their history and existence over Palestine, they have up to this day succeeded in making fools of investigators and scholars. And it's true, because you go into the occult side of things, that the white race hold the fire. That's our gig. Hebrew was a secret dialect which was devised by the Irish priesthood to preserve their secret lore and rituals. Its use was kept exclusive of the priests, thereby keeping all knowledge of sacerdotal things from the uninitiated or the laity, as it was composed and made use of by the Irish priest of Aisa to preserve their secret lore. It was taken over and made use of by the Roman Church to conceal and make plausible the secret fraud which she had perpetrated upon the Christian world. This explains why it was said that only one copy of the original first scripture was written in Hebrew, and this is also shows us why Hebrew is so nearly like the Irish language. To further this deception, she had them copied into Greek. So then you can see where the Norse comes from, the Sanskrit, the runic symbolism. It all comes from this side of so the western side, and then it was migrated to the east. And then, of course, over time, they've kicked our heads in and shifted us back, and now they've took over our homes. They've took over our bases because of what the empire's done. Because these people that have been moved about as immigrants, and has been since like the 50s, you're all being moved around because you're under the empire. You know, so you started on thinking, oh, we have to kill this empire. Well, you're it. You are it, unfortunately. This explains what has always been a puzzle to investigators: why the so-called Hebrew people who figured in the myth with Jesus as his apostles, and who of their own cultural Hebrew language should write the 4 Gospels of the New Testament in Greek. Hebrew was never spoken by the Aramaic people of Syria, the so-called Jews, or by the people of any other country. It was used by the ancient Irish priesthood of Aisa, precisely as Latin is today used by the Roman priests. Hebrew was never spoken in the Aramaic. I've done that. Hebrew is a sacerdotal dialect. Know this to be true, and many of the Protestant clergy know it and are conscious of being impostors, and that they are perpetrating a cheat and a fraud which must be exposed for the scrutiny of the intellectual world of today. In my studies and investigations in search of knowledge and light, I became convinced that Hebrew was an artificially constructed language of the priests, as in our day we have the newly constructed language of Esperanto and Volapük. I kept my discovery secret, but in time I found that there were other investigators who had also discovered, Hebrew was not what the Roman and British churchmen have claimed it to be. That is the national language of God's chosen people, of a country in Asia, the Hebrew or so-called Jewish race. Here's what J.M. Price says. The Hebrew language was at first a secret sacerdotal jargon of Egyptian origin, and St. Gregory of Nyssa asserted, and this is from Horatio, page 12, that the most learned men of his day knew positively that it was not as ancient as other languages, and did not become the spoken language of the Jews until after their departure from Egypt. The Apocalypse Unsealed, page 98. So it's not new to suggest this stuff at all. And of course, when you get into it, all our chronology and history has been put together by this guy Josephus Scaliger. A fraud, a complete tossbag, and he were operating for some very, very, very spurious Jesuits. And if he wasn't a Jesuit himself, I think he actually was. And that's 1689. I think that's when he died. So 1540 he was born. So this is how the Jesuits reformed chronology, in which we're all working to. And then you look at here, and we've mentioned the Holy See. And you look into it, and it's classed as the jurisdiction of the Pope. But just look at these families: Aldo Brandini, Borgia, Breakspear, Shigit, Colonna, Conte, Este, Farnese, Medici, Orsini, Pallavicini, Pamphila, Somaglia. From these families, all of the families that you tend to see in history, and Thermal Taxis, Rothschilds, or Bower as they were, are all secondary to these merchant class families. This is so, and these families have procured all the popes at least since before the Crusades. Yeah? So in essence, these families are the Roman emperors. It's from these families, and they work together. They battle each other left, right, and centre for position. But when it comes down to A lads A, the Venetian party of the north, or the new Venetian party of the north, which are there, will pull together for the overall agenda, and they call themselves the divine lines. Now, I'm not kidding myself. There's probably a level above this. The real hidden royal families, and probably these are branches of. You know, it wouldn't surprise me at all. So it's just a bit more data. Those who became known as Jews were, however, originally neither Israelites nor Hebrews, and were not racially Semitic. The term Hebrew, and possibly also Jew, comes from the Old Irish lure, and the Irish Gaelic Ibur or Iberu, meaning yew tree, or men of the yew. The yew tree was considered very sacred to the Druids and Egyptian Magi. The Iberu or Ibere or Abre or Aberai turn up in Egypt as the wise ones or elders. The letter H added as a prefix simply meant the, and so the word Hebrew meant the Ibru, or the Iberu. This is the origin of the word Iberia, which signified Spain and Hibernia. Now that works again when you're looking at the Carthaginians, and it's been proven today that they did actually sacrifice their children. And when you get into the praises or prayers that they put up there, they were sacrificing their own for gain. So that's what they were actually doing. So Spain and Hibernia which signified island. The word rabbi is a rendition of a variant of this ancient name, Abarai or Abaru. The Abaru were Druidic elders who had travelled to Egypt in remote periods and who had brought solar worship there. They were probably akin to the pre-dynastic Shemsu Hor, or disciples of Horus, the tall, fair-complexioned, technically proficient race whose remains were found in tombs in Nubia by the eminent archaeologist Professor Walter B. Emery. This word Ibaru had a similarity to Apiru, Egyptian Apir, which meant wanderer, undesirable, shepherd, or foreigner. This unfortunate similarity of etymology has caused great confusion, but has favoured the machinations of those elites who crave to obscure the truth of their Western ancestry. The same incident, just a little bit different. Wait a minute. I think I put these in. I should have done these a bit better. These train fabricators considered that no two or more persons could write the facts regarding events in real life in just the same identical words. So it was thought best to have a little variation inserted into the accounts as given by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. So that is how we find it arranged in those 4 books by the Roman doctors. If Luke tells of an event in one way, Joel tells it a little differently. And so with Matthew and Mark, Luke records that the miraculous drop of fishes was made at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. John says that it did not happen until after he had risen from the dead. John says that although the number of fish was great, the net was not broken. And Luke says that their net did break. Matthew says that Jesus told the 12 apostles to go and preach, and commanded them to provide neither gold nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves. And in Mark it's made no mention of. So, you know, they just a bit of confusion, so you can all argue over which one is your favourite. I don't know what's this. Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, so it says the same incident, just a little bit different. Mark is made to mention the same incident, just a little bit different, and with a slight contradiction of his infallible brother scribe. He says that Jesus commanded them to take nothing for their journey save a staff only. Like inconsistencies, which are so many in these 4 Gospels, stamp them as counterfeit books. In fact, the very names of the authors to whom these books are ascribed are forgeries and misleading. They were intended so to be for it was claimed that they were Hebrew, while the plain truth is that they were taken entire from the ideals of the Irish Gospels, with the nomenclature slightly changed in order to escape detection. And just another example, it says the following agreement in the writings under the names of Matthew, Mark and Luke regarding the impression made upon the people by the teachings of Jesus is an example which shows plainly the work of the forging priests. It would be impossible for such agreement to have occurred in the original writings of any three men, writing individually and independently on any subject whatsoever. But in fabrication from the older works and collaborating, the prescribed simply blundered and made each of the three witnesses write down and repeat the same identical expression in copy as to how Jesus impressed the people. Here is the forged testimony. Matthew says they were astonished at his doctrine. Mark says they were astonished at his doctrine. Luke says they were astonished at his doctrine. Many authors and critics have commented upon and pointed out the inaccuracies and inconsistencies of the scriptures, and many of them have stated their firm belief that they were copied from older books, but none of them could obtain a clue beyond the surmise what was far from the truth, and none of them was able to produce the real facts which were necessary, because of course they'd never admit that the origin of this theology we call Christian is way, way older. What's this? It says the book of Genesis, chapter 10, gives us the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we are told that the sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog, Madai and Yavan and Tubal and Mesha and Tiras. We are then given the names of the descendants of Gomer and Javan, but not of Magog. Joseph says the sons of Magog were the Scythians. The Irish annals take up the genealogy of Magog's family. The Bible leaves it. The Book of Invasions. Atlantis, the antediluvian world. Phoenicians, and we are told that a branch of this family were driven out of Egypt in the time of Moses. He wandered through Africa for 40 years and passed by a lake of Salavev to the altars of the Philistines and between Rusicada and the mountains Azur. And he came by the river Molon and by the sea to the pillars of Hercules and through the Tuscan Sea. And he made for Spain and dwelt there many years. And he increased and multiplied, and his people were multiplied. From all these facts, it appears that the population of Ireland came from the west and not from Asia. That it was one of many waves of population flowing out from the island of Atlantis. And herein we find the expansion of the problem which has puzzled the Aryan scholars. As Ireland is farther from the Punjab than Persia, Greece, Rome or Scandinavia, it would follow that the Celtic wave of migration must have been the earliest sent out from the Sanskrit centre. But it is now asserted by Professor Schleicher and others that the Celtic tongue shows that it separated from the Sanskrit original tongue later than the others, and that it is more closely allied to the Latin than any other Aryan tongue. This is entirely inexplicable upon any theory of an Eastern origin of the Indo-European races, but very easily understood if we recognise the Aryan and Celtic migrations as going out about the same time from the Atlantean fountainhead. Let's have a look here. The Thracians and the Pelasgians, the people of Thrace, who were the most ancient inhabitants of Greece, were Celto-Scythians. Also, the Iberians who dwelt in Iberia between the Euxine and Caspian seas were a mixture of Celts and Scythians. And from them were descended the Georgians and the Circassians and the Caucasian. And the reason why they ate the Scythians or the white race is because a queen knocked off the greatest king, Cyrus. So that's where they've got Trump at today. Are the Scythians related to the Celts? What is this Magog led out a colony which from here we name Magogs, but by the Greeks called Scythians? But Keating specifies the precise title of Scythians, from which the Irish Celts are descended. The Roman soldiers crossed the strait and conquered the island, destroying both the Druids and the sacred groves of their religion. Following this defeat, the Druidic culture never again flourished as it did in the early days. And that's, did the Romans fight the Druids? Yes, they did. So, anyway, so that's as much at writing, it's just a few images now. But there's just some interesting, let's have a look. So these are old maps. So you've got Ireland, the first two from left, are Ireland. And if you look down there at south of Ireland, southeast, you've got Brigantes as an Irish tribe. So originally they were in Ireland. But a big swathe of the north of England, right up into the heart of Scotland, was also for a time called the land of the Brigantes. So you can see that this old system existed on the British Isles, and Ireland was its centre. And then you've got the Brithen in 528 AD, Picts at the top, Scoti. You've got the Angles coming in on the east. Scotcher you've got over there in Northern Ireland, and the remainder of the entire Britons were classed as Cymri or Cymri, and that's your Trojan, your Celtic, your Scythians, your Dan, your tribes of Dan. So your original Druids and the system came through the tribe of Dan, and that obviously was annihilated at some point. Where basically what seems to happen is the dark side learned the knowledge, took it, moved up to Hyperborea and created a centre from there, and then spread it east and south from the Silk Road. Interesting. So this is where we get Hyperborea. Let's have a look. So Herodotus also briefly mentions him, or rather refuses to mention him. I shall not tell the story of Abaris, said to have been a Hyperborean, who went around the whole world carrying an arrow and eating nothing. Histories 436. In much more modern Irish mythology, Abaris was considered one of the earliest Druids. March 11th, 2021. So, did the Druids, the original ones, move up to become Hyperboreans? And thus, that's how they spread across the Silk Road, what we class as the Old Church. Or, the other hypothesis is that it was the dark side that moved up into Hyperborea and then spread, used that system they'd learned from the original Druids in order to control in a more dictatorial way. Who knows? But there's definitely more to the Hyperboreans than meets the eye. And there always has been. But they were held in high regard as a very advanced race by the Egyptians and also by the Athenians, not to be confused with the Greeks. So when we're looking at this old architecture and why they've had to get rid of it, we've said before, if they're pushing this idea that we were monkeys and cavemen and we're evolving, well, that's total bollocks. It's absolute nonsense, but essential if you're going to completely and utterly mind control massive populations through pseudoscience. So here you can see you've got the old ways that they use light, because they had electricity way back in 1790. If you look at the bottom picture, that's an image or a drawing from a time 1790 at the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and them are clearly electrical lighting systems. You know, you've got this collecting atmospheric electricity, popular electricity, these are machines that do that, and they look like little balloons, don't they? And it's collecting atmospheric electricity. It's just the point of it. At the same time, he's gone through the actual movements of manipulating the gun. It has been the dream of many inventors to devise some means by which the electricity in the atmosphere might be collected and utilised in the service of man. It is the opinion of many that vast quantities of electricity are present in the high altitudes, or even in the regions of infinite space beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Among the latest methods proposed is one patented by Walter I. Pennock of Philadelphia. In the words of the inventor, the scheme relates to a method of collecting electricity from the strata laden with electricity at high altitudes in the atmosphere. through the medium of wire cables suspended from one or more balloons and in conveying this electricity to the Earth's surface. So it's nothing new. And then you've got clearly a light there, and we're on horses and carriages there, so electricity is way before they've told us. And then to the right you've got another ancient building, old style, emitting light clearly, which looks like it's electric and not gas, as they'd have us all believing, with candles. Again, these massive towers. There's also the idea that a lot of these early towers were like Eiffel Tower, Blackpool Tower, the one that were at on Wirral, were actually landing ports for these airships. Remember the airships, and that the Hindenburg was another of those images that they needed to cement in your minds that that was the end of the old aristocratic way to travel, because you'd got airplanes coming on. So again, they symbolised that in that catastrophe of the Hindenburg, and that these towers were actually where these ships came to, and people got on and got off and came down these towers. But whatever way you look at it, look at these intricate towers here. You're telling me that architects today, and then the last 500 years, are anything like the quality of this stuff? Absolutely no way on earth are they anything like that. I mean, architects today are buffoons. They're not even architects. I'm a builder, I could do better. And this is interesting as well. Going back to old school horticulture, that using electricity they can grow huge crops. Yeah, that's a clover. Look at the size of that. I mean, if you're into horticulture, you'd probably see it better than most. But using electricity to grow vegetables makes a huge difference. Yeah, they're not playing famine at the moment, aren't they? Now they're putting into everybody's mind the idea of ration. You've got to see it as that's what they're doing. All they're doing is putting it in your minds, this idea of ration right now. And look. So Pan-American. So these are now we're getting into looking at. So we're told through cowboy films that the great swathes of America were just full of Native American tribes fighting heresy issues and doing dancing. But yet, you look at this is like you're looking at 1500s time, so through the 1600s. So we've got civil war going on here. All this has been built in the US. So you've got Louisiana Purchase Exposition here. So again, world fairs. Remember we talked about the world fairs and these expositions, just how important they were in how the priestcraft could program people's minds to their new ideas, consumerism, nationalism, the idea of race, because it wasn't a big thing back in the old school way that we all lived together. And then you've got Detroit. Look at these buildings here, and this brickwork. This is reminiscent of how they built the walls in Constantinople, way back in the day. And there's a lot of these buildings that they class as Tartarian, but a lot of our sort of steam engine buildings where we're working for sewerage or pumping water here on Blighty, we're built in this specific architectural design. And I found it back. It's in Constantinople, the wall itself, so you can see how old that is. And then you've got this other one down here, another building. I forget, it's a hotel that again were built in America. And look, I mean, these are the same kind of Germanic kind of Aryan, Persian kind of architecture. So this is interesting as well. American Magazine, 1744, January. And there you can see you've got a Native American, but look at all these churches. I mean, these are bustling towns, It's just so much that you don't get it through general seeking it. You just don't find it. You've got to really... So it is an interesting looking at what, you know, proof again that they've been purposefully destroying these buildings, this architecture. So in 1882, you have an image of a street there, and you've got some really fancy buildings, and then one that's not quite as fancy. And then below, you're looking at 2000. So that's 1882, that's what the street looked like. 2011, that's the only building they've left up, which is the third one from the left, in your top left. You know, why would they do that? So they weren't knocking it down for anything other than getting rid of that kind of architecture, because it doesn't fit into this idea that we're evolving. You got Murat Temple and Theatre in Indianapolis here. Again, look, this is an older, different architecture to what they've been putting up since they got this twisted Notre Dame Gothic architecture going on everywhere. I mean, these are inviting buildings. It's, the architecture is inviting. The Gothic style of everything is freaky. I've never been comfortable with it. Same down here, where they keep in certain buildings but changing the architecture of the towers so that you can't see. And that was in 1890s in bottom left. And then bottom right, Army Navy Hospital, Hot Springs, and that, no date on there. Again, but just look at the quality of the buildings that they had in America before the Europeans flooded it with old psychos. Or Rome, the Roman version of it. I mean, America, they were Protestant people, weren't they? The WASP elite that were the first really to take root there, apart from the Spanish side. I suppose the Spanish side, they took over all Mexico and California and all that, but even so, yeah, it's weird. There's too much. It's like Detroit. Look at that to the right. All them beautiful architecture, and you've got 1890 there. You've got this said to be built in 1890. I mean, look at the state of that. If we were to go with the reset, as I've said, from 1850 to 1900, then during that, so from Napoleonic Wars right up to 1900, especially from 1850, this civil war that they cracked on was just a show. It was a show so they could destroy all the old architecture, which is exactly what they did, because there were a massive amount of fires. So there, St George 1877, Logan 1884. There's nobody building stuff like that today. Nobody. What have we got here? Ah, this is interesting. So the destruction of over 17,000 buildings, and that picture's on Detroit. And they had a lot of these fires. So, but think about it, right? This is approaching the reset and during the 50 years of reset. So it's not just a 50-year gig. They give themselves the demarcation from 2000 when they launched all these millennial companies, or which were charities and trusts, all controlled by the crown. We had the end of Napoleonic Wars, etc. All these soldiers, blah blah blah. My guess is they shipped them all over to America, and then started to rearrange Rome, because it were all belonging to Rome, to rearrange what the Protestants had built in America to serve them, and part of that was all these fires. So you've got fire of 1835 in New York, 1839 of Mobile, 1849 fire of St. Louis, Pittsburgh 1845, San Francisco 1851, Portland 1866, Chicago 1871, Peshtigo 1871, Boston 1872, Seattle 1889, Charleston 1861, Richmond, Portsmouth, Galveston, Dayton, Syracuse and Troy. All these mass conflagrations that destroyed all the architecture in America especially during the time of the Civil War, because that's what they were doing. The South were destroying all the mills, so the North couldn't use the mills for their own ends, and the North were just destroying everything in its wake. And it was basically about removing. It's Rome and took God into America. That's what you have to see it as. Rome got into America and then started to shift it into its idea of how it should be, and not what it was formed by originally and expanded on by the reformed characters. Kansas City, now we're getting into mud flood ideas. So this is Kansas City. They had to excavate it at one point. It had mud everywhere. Now, whether that came in on a river, I don't know. But look at them removing all the mud. So there is something that happens every now and again. And mud is a big part of how it sort of destroys places. But then, of course, if it only goes up to first floor level, then we class them as cellars after that, don't we? We don't know any different. But when you do look down at them, they're clearly windows and doors, not built cellars into these buildings. Same again, bottom left. They've removed the earth, and look at that. Them are windows. And they're not windows to nowhere at one point. You can see that's probably where the street were. And you've got other examples again. And this one, middle bottom, I can't remember which family it is now. It's one of the well-known families in America's mansions, and that's what they had going on underneath. So I don't think that's suggesting a mud flood. That's just showing that, or it could be. If you're looking at that there, what is these steps going to? It must be. And then again, you've got bottom right, another example. But these mud floods are an interesting thing because there's so much evidence to show that these things have actually gone on a lot more than we think, and more recently as well. Some more here. So they just took out all the earth, and look what you've got beneath this street. I mean, it's not even concurrent with the buildings. The buildings are set back. This is an old existing front to something. It's, same again here on this middle one. And then same again on the right. Clearly, these windows weren't, built for in a cellar. I've just got the mouse has run out of battery. How about that? I'm going to have to panic. But it's clearly them buildings weren't built with cellars. Those are windows, and they just bricked them up like they've done many times here. So there's something strange happened. Whether they've actually physically filled all these areas in, who knows? But just look at some of the events that are going on around the world today with these landslides and such like, then things like that are not actually that out of it, are they? We're back in business. And then this. Now these are interesting because these are everywhere. These star forts and settlements. And so many of them are hidden in plain sight, in truth. They're all over the world. But there's a plethora of them in what is Siberia. And again, like I said, look like they had a nuclear conflagration. So these systems have got to be part of a very civilized culture. And obviously, they're not ancient like pyramid days. These are clearly civilizations that have existed post-Atlantis, post-flood. And they're all over the world. And they're in beautiful shape. So I'd say they're more in sync with geology, they're more in sync with solfeggio, proper notes and frequencies. So I'd say that this civilization, pre what Rome became, were far in advance spiritually than Rome could ever be. As long as it's got an hole in its ass, it could never be anything like that. Now, just to finish off on that, this is another important factor that comes to bear when you start to look into these histories. And I noted when I looked at my Tortoria page, the videos I had up specifically on this subject have gone. They're no longer available. And I can understand why. Because when they do these resets and when they're killing all the grown-ups, what they're after is all these children. And then when they've got their hands on these children, this is when they replant the world with all your offspring for whatever reason. And this is how they build these new reset systems. And it's basically it's essential that they have these children always. I mean, you're looking at here then from 1854 to 1929, more than 200,000 children would travel by train from the East Coast to seek new homes in nearly every state in the continental United States. And this is what they do. You look at China. China have got all these mega cities, haven't they? These mega cities that are empty. And they're crumbling. And this is another image I found when I was looking into my stuff. Or, I can't remember where I got it from actually. An older version of the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whoever shall know himself shall find it, is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Yeah, so who then can turn around and say Jesus had no connections to the theologies coming out of Egypt? And of course I'm talking about pre-dynastic Egypt, rather than the Anuna, or as you know it, Anunnaki, that moved in there from Sumeria and began the pharaonic jobbers. So I hope you could see that. But it's interesting data, isn't it, when you think about it? There's so many images though that are no longer available, which is a bit crap. But if I go back to, oh, that one's not playing. So let me have a look here. So if well, that's a bit shit, isn't it? So that's supposed to have, hang on. So but it's not working for some strange reason. I'll try it one more time. No, it's not doing it for some strange reason. I wonder why that is. Let me try it one more time. So we've got it here. Boom. No, for some strange reason, it's... Oh, wait a minute, I know why. Because I'm thick. Now we've got it. So I'm just going to... Because I had this and I'd forgot about this. But this is an interesting page. And it's got tons and tons and tons of images. Well, actually not tons. It's got maps. And then it starts showing star forts all over Europe. So these star forts were very important to the civilization that we had before Babylon took over Rome. There's tons of them. They're on ports all the time. They're really good for defensive. So they obviously were built in a time when they still had an enemy. You know what I mean? And like, spread so far across the world, you're looking at, you've got to be 10 tribes, hasn't it? This kind of stuff. And just everywhere. Just these star forts. All over the world. But some of the maps I saw of Siberia, there were absolutely hundreds of them. And clearly what looked like huge craters from perhaps a massive nuclear conflagration. So some had happened over there, and now we've got, and had for the last few years, Russia. This Russia script, claiming it as their own, when, you know, maybe pre-1917, Russia might have been able to say they were a remnant of the empire that went across Siberia. But post-1917, especially when they got to Soviet Union time, we're not talking of Russian people. We're talking about something completely different. So how can it be so? So it's a blag. It's a blag that they've got going to put Russia, raise Russia to the top as this new power in the West, as some kind of more moral shindig. And you can see so many people, you're going, oh, I'm Orthodox now, I'm Orthodox. Well, you know, really? Have you really done yourself any justice by flipping from one program to another? I don't think people have, to be honest. So there again, just a bit of a dip into something a bit Jackanory, where we don't have to think and we can chill on that a bit. But the histories is just so blasé. And to say that, if you look at it properly, to think and comprehend that, or to be expected to, that the theology that's been pushed by Rome, I could say it's for Vatican II, but clearly it's been going on for a lot longer, would be in any way in sync with any of the Gospels, full stop. It's retarded, innit, to allow yourself to continue to present yourself as operating for this glorious ancient idea of morality, the original church, and then tie it and say that this Roman church is pushing it out. It's not, is it? And it hasn't been for a long time. A very, very, very long time. Because it was taken over. Middle Ages, merchant class. And that's why we're in this mess. So I thought it were interesting, and I thought you might be interested in, just at least, if you've not seen that kind of data before, it's there in your mind. If you want to pursue it, you can. So that's not evidence for electrical use. I agree, it's not. What I'm saying is, it's clear that there's an architecture that was far superior to anything that they've been building since this Gothic style come out. Why would they do that? You look at so many of these structures, because the tower mad, they do seem to have, or some images from ancient time, older times, a lot of copper going on. Why? You've got Tesla. Tesla shows you that you can pull energy out of the ether. And you look at some of his machinery, they look like some of these towers, or these towers are what he built. Basically, you can then apply to some of this architecture and towers and think, well, hang on a minute, that looks like a lot of products that Tesla showed us. Did they have a use? You know, you've got to look at it this way. So you're quite right, Debbie, they're not evidence. And I'm not suggesting either way that you should take it as such. But clearly they've been destroying architecture for about 500 years, maybe more, 600 years even. Rather than giving it us, they've been destroying it. And Germany, we could say, were one of the last places in the West that had that and suffered that fate. They annihilated the architecture across Germany. Looking into copper and veg growing. Yeah, copper again, I believe, has massive benefit to the soil. Or, you see, when I were into gardening and all that, I got a book and it was telling me that it's not the soil that makes things grow, it's the frequencies around the plant. So if you're in a shitty frequency area, you're never going to grow anything, no matter how good the soil is. And copper then is by way of changing. So yeah, I'm with you there. I have back in the midst of time heard about copper having an effect on the frequency in the atmosphere, as opposed to it necessarily having to bother about the soil, which would make sense again with this spraying tech that they're throwing all over the world, wouldn't it? Because that's definitely affecting the atmosphere. So maybe it's a bit of a diversion that they're changing the soil, because that'd take some doing, would it not? You know, even though they've been doing it since 60s, it would take some doing to change the soil. But if you change the energy, electrical frequency, magnetic frequency in the atmosphere itself, would then have an effect on how plant life grows. Also us as well, wouldn't it? So, yeah, you'll have to keep us up to date on that, Debbie. June says good night. Take care, June. Off you go. Bottom right house looks like Salem's Lot House. I don't know. There's that cathedral in Barcelona that's more like fancy architects than a... Yeah, I mean, it's clear that they were a lot better and smarter before. So obviously somebody's took it out. They don't want us to know it. And they've been knocking it down. And they wouldn't do that without reason, would they? Have you tried getting ready to... the fires are still going on. Yeah, they are all across America. They've been using lasers, if you've been paying attention. And melting cars to the road. And then saying, oh, it's a forest fire. There's not a tree burnt, but houses are burnt. Cars are melted. And the people are melted inside them. There is the theory that they were really buried, not a mudslide. Is there? So there's actually, I've not seen that. So these are just thoughts that came to my mind. I've also thought about liquefaction. If you got a vibration going at such an intensity, the soil, and I've done a lot of earthworks and groundworks in my time. That is possible. I've dug, running sand. If you've ever come across running sand when you're digging footings, what a strange gig that is. It's odd. The earth does some strange stuff, but again, the jury's there. I don't know. I'm not claiming to know. We're just exploring. So yeah, they could very well have been deliberately buried. Definitely. Solomon built star forts. Well, there's no evidence really that Solomon's temple ever existed. As well, it's just a fantasy dreamed up by the priesthood. The most concentrated density star fort is Vietnam. Is it? Oh, well, that'd explain a lot then, wouldn't it, about Vietnam War? Would it not? Just like they did in Iraq and knocked everything down there. So I don't know anything about the Vietnam bit. Those houses in Detroit are mostly from Brush Park. Some of them have been restored, but a lot have been knocked down. I can tell you. America is the picture basically that we've been fed about America, the Wild West, the battle with the Indians, isn't as it would appear. Let's say, I'm not saying they didn't annihilate the Indians, of course they did, but not necessarily in the time frame or in the manner in which we're told. Star thoughts. There's some nice. I mean, there are some restored and they're beautiful architecture. But it's a welcoming architecture, isn't it? So you can see the mindset that built that were a bit more in tune, whereas this Gothic style, the mills, the miserable shit, that's not welcoming, is it? It's, in fact, if anything, it's you don't want to go in. These metal buildings, all this metal everywhere, it affects your frequencies. It seems the ugliness of buildings nowadays is something that most people don't even notice. Well, that's true as well, yeah. There were star forts in Australia, now they're demolished golf courses and burial grounds that have been landscaped. Yeah, this system, this old, and it's not Atlantis, it's post-Atlantis, was clearly across the entire Earth. Because they found everywhere. And like, so you're looking at your pyramids, you're looking at your two South American cultures, I'd say that was way before. So the like earlier part maybe in Atlantis, or even the age before that were their thing, and who knows? But now it's certainly this system that they're resetting to now does not express that kind of frequency. So it's a lesser, regardless of what you want to say, as an idea, regardless of what race, culture, creed you want to claim to be. It's pretty obvious to everybody if you sit and think about it. What they're offering up now on a plate with this reset is far more inferior to any of that kind of architecture. And anybody that says different, I'd have to say you're not a full shilling. So anyway, I thought we'd have a chill this week because it's given me a chill as well. I've done a lot of thunking this week and I am in thick of some stuff, so it just made it a little bit easier for me, and I thought it'd give you something to just chill about rather than get excited and have to think a lot. So folks, with that I'll say I hope you have a good week. Thanks for joining. Thanks to you mods for keeping it together. And till the next time.